Who is that bulky big lady over there? She looks like an elephant. Ha ha ha. Hello everyone, you are all welcome to my channel. Hit the subscription button, like, share, and comment what you think about the story, and also watch till the end and enjoy. The city lights seemed softer. Laughter flowed more freely. Even the air inside the Veil Foundation charity gala carried the scent of luxury: champagne, roses, expensive perfume, and generations of old money gathered beneath glittering crystal chandeliers. Everywhere Emily Carter looked, she saw people who belonged on magazine covers. Fashion models sparkled beneath diamonds. Powerful executives laughed with reporters. Socialites posed gracefully beside the grand marble staircase while violin music drifted through the ballroom. And standing quietly near the dessert table was Emily, trying her best to disappear. She tugged nervously at the sleeves of her emerald green dress. Her best friend Vanessa had convinced her to attend, promising it would be fun. Now she regretted saying yes. People were staring. Not quick glances. Long, judging looks. The kind that lingered on her curves before ending with amused smirks. She's beautiful, but that dress is a little ambitious. Who invited her? She doesn't fit in here. The whispers floated through the crowd like invisible knives. Emily pretended not to hear them, but every word found its target. She folded her arms over her stomach and reached for a glass of sparkling water, hoping it would calm the growing discomfort. Then everything changed. The ballroom doors opened. Conversations immediately softened. Camera flashes exploded near the entrance. A voice whispered excitedly through the crowd. "Jonathan Veil is here." Emily turned and instantly understood the reaction. Jonathan Veil didn't simply enter a room. He owned it. Tall, striking, and impossibly composed, he moved through the ballroom in a charcoal suit that looked custom-made for power itself. As CEO of Veil Industries, he was one of Manhattan's most influential billionaires. People admired him. People feared him. Stories about his ruthlessness were legendary. He fired executives without hesitation, crushed competitors publicly, and rarely showed an ounce of sympathy. Yet despite everything, people remained fascinated by him. Jonathan crossed the ballroom surrounded by investors, reporters, and security. His expression never changed. His confidence felt untouchable. "God," Vanessa whispered beside Emily. "He's terrifying." Emily silently agreed. Then disaster struck. A photographer stepped backward without looking and collided with a passing server. The tray tipped. Wine glasses crashed. The startled server stumbled directly toward Emily. Before she could react, she lost her balance and slammed into Jonathan Veil. Red wine splashed across the front of his expensive suit. The ballroom froze. Completely. The music continued somewhere in the distance, but around them there was only silence. "Oh my God," Emily gasped. "I'm so sorry. Someone bumped into me. I didn't mean." Jonathan slowly looked down at the wine staining his jacket. Then his icy gray eyes lifted toward her. Hundreds of people watched. Cameras pointed. Phones rose. Everyone waited. Jonathan studied her for a moment. Then his gaze shifted briefly toward the dessert table behind her. A slow smirk touched his lips. "Cool. Calculated. Maybe desserts," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "should come with warning labels." The room remained silent for half a second. Then laughter erupted. Sharp laughter. Humiliating laughter. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Some guests openly laughed. Others tried to hide it behind champagne glasses. Phones immediately began recording. Jonathan remained calm, as though publicly humiliating a stranger meant absolutely nothing. Vanessa stepped forward. "That was rude." Jonathan barely acknowledged her. His gaze lingered on Emily for one final cold second before he adjusted his cufflinks and walked away toward the reporters. Just like that. As if she were insignificant. The humiliation crashed over Emily all at once. The staring, the whispers, the cameras. Every insecurity she had spent years fighting suddenly returned. Fighting tears, she turned and hurried from the ballroom. Behind her, the laughter continued. By midnight, the video had spread across the internet. TikTok, Instagram, celebrity gossip accounts. Millions of views. Billionaire CEO destroys woman at charity gala. Jonathan Vail's savage comment goes viral. The internet reacts. But the internet wasn't reacting. It was attacking. Strangers analyzed Emily's appearance as though she weren't a real person. Thousands mocked her body. Some claimed Jonathan had only said what everyone else was thinking. Every comment felt like another wound. At 2 a.m, Emily sat alone inside her tiny apartment while rain tapped against the windows. Her phone screen glowed in the darkness. She should never have attended the gala. Never. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. After a moment, she answered. Hello. Silence. Several uncomfortable seconds passed before a woman finally spoke. If Jonathan Vail contacts you tomorrow. The caller stopped. Something about the pause felt wrong. Dangerous. Don't trust him. Emily sat upright.
What?
Who is this? But the line went dead. No explanation. No name. Nothing. The apartment felt colder. A chill crept slowly down her spine. Because deep inside, she knew the warning wasn't about embarrassment. It was about Jonathan himself. The following morning, heavy rain soaked Manhattan as Emily entered the lobby of the marketing firm where she worked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes after a sleepless night spent avoiding social media. She kept her head down while walking toward the elevators. Then the atmosphere shifted. The receptionist stopped speaking. Employees froze. Several heads turned toward the entrance. Confused, Emily looked up, and her stomach dropped. Jonathan Vail stood beside the elevators, waiting, dressed entirely in black.
Calm.
Controlled. Yet something was different. He didn't look arrogant. He looked furious and strangely desperate. In one hand, he carried a thick, confidential file. Printed boldly across the front were 2 words that made Emily's heart stop. Emily Carter. And suddenly she realized the story was only beginning. Tension, character dynamics, and cliffhanger. Rain hammered against the windows of the 32nd floor as Emily Carter sat frozen inside the conference room, staring at Jonathan Vail across the table. Nothing about this felt real. Less than 24 hours ago, the billionaire CEO had humiliated her in front of half of Manhattan. Cameras had captured every painful second, and the internet had happily turned her embarrassment into entertainment. Now he sat directly across from her in complete silence. A thick, confidential file rested between them. Jonathan hadn't touched the coffee beside him. He hadn't checked his phone. He simply watched her with cold gray eyes that made people feel exposed without saying a word. Finally, Emily broke the silence. If this is some kind of joke, she said quietly, I'm not interested. It's not a joke. His voice remained controlled and deep, but something beneath the usual confidence sounded different. Tired. Almost desperate. Then why are you here? Without answering immediately, Jonathan pushed the file toward her. Open it. Reluctantly, Emily pulled it closer. The moment she looked inside, confusion spread across her face. Medical reports. Genetic compatibility charts. Confidential fertility records. She looked up sharply. What is this? For the first time, Jonathan looked away. My sister is dying. The words landed heavily between them. Emily blinked. Jonathan Vail wasn't the type of man who admitted weakness. Yet for a brief moment, the ruthless billionaire looked painfully human. She has a rare genetic condition, he continued. 3 years ago, doctors preserved embryos before her condition worsened. Rain crashed against the glass as he spoke. There's only one viable embryo left. The surrogate assigned to carry it disappeared 2 weeks ago. A chill ran through Emily's body. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. Your medical profile was flagged through a private compatibility network. Her stomach dropped.
No.
You haven't heard the offer. I don't need to. She pushed the file away immediately. Absolutely not. Jonathan inhaled slowly. I'm offering $10 million. Silence filled the room. 10 million. The number sounded unreal. Impossible. You seriously think money fixes this? No, Jonathan replied evenly. But it changes lives. Anger flashed across her face. You humiliated me in front of the entire internet yesterday. Something crossed his expression. Regret. Maybe. But it vanished too quickly to be certain. That situation got out of control. Emily laughed bitterly. Out of control? You mocked my body in front of cameras. His jaw tightened. For a second, she thought he might apologize. Instead, the billionaire mask returned. This arrangement would remain confidential, he said. You would receive full medical care, housing, security, and compensation. She stared at him in disbelief. You think I'd carry a stranger's child after what you did to me? No, Jonathan said quietly. His eyes locked onto hers. I think you need money. The blunt truth hurt because it was accurate. And somehow he knew it. Emily stood abruptly. This conversation is over. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Then Jonathan spoke again. Your mother's hospital bills are already overdue. She froze. Slowly, she turned around. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Dangerously. How do you know about my mother? I make it my business to know things before approaching someone. A sick feeling settled in her stomach. Her mother's chemotherapy treatments had drained everything. Savings, retirement funds, hope. And somehow this billionaire knew all of it. Jonathan rose from his chair. You could save your mother, he said quietly. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, more suffocating. Emily hated herself for hesitating, because part of her mind had already begun calculating. Hospital bills, medication, survival. Jonathan watched the battle unfolding across her face. Then, unexpectedly, his expression softened. My sister's name is Sophia. The change caught Emily off guard. Not because of the information, because of the way he said it. As though speaking Sophia's name cracked something inside him. Jonathan walked toward the rain-covered windows overlooking Manhattan. For 8 months, he said softly, I've watched her prepare herself to die. Emily swallowed hard. She wants this child to exist before she's gone. Silence stretched between them. The storm outside blurred the city lights into streaks of gold and silver. Finally, Emily whispered, Why me? Jonathan turned toward her. For the first time, she saw genuine exhaustion in his eyes. Because you're the only match left. The vulnerability disappeared almost immediately, as if he regretted revealing it. He placed a business card on the table. Think about it. Then he headed for the door. Just before leaving, he stopped. Without looking back, he said quietly, And Emily, the internet's opinion of you says more about them than it does about you. Then he was gone. The door closed softly behind him. Emily stood motionless, confused, angry, shaken. Because somehow the cruel billionaire who had humiliated her yesterday had shown more vulnerability in a few minutes than most people revealed in years. Yet something still felt wrong. Very wrong. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, hospital bills scattered across the kitchen table, while her mother slept in the next room. $10 million. Medical care. Security. A child that wasn't hers. And Jonathan Vale at the center of it all. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. Frowning, Emily opened social media. Her blood turned cold. Photos of her entering Jonathan's building that morning had already leaked online. Headlines exploded across celebrity blogs. Mystery woman secretly meeting billionaire CEO. Jonathan Vale's overnight obsession? Is she carrying his baby? Emily stopped breathing. She had told absolutely no one. Then a loud knock slammed against her apartment door. Another followed immediately. Harder. Aggressive. Miss Carter, are you pregnant with Jonathan Vale's child? Did he pay you? Open the door. Paparazzi. Her hands began to shake. And as the voices grew louder outside, one terrifying realization settled deep inside her chest. Someone had leaked the meeting. And whoever did it wanted her life destroyed. The paparazzi remained outside Emily Carter's apartment until nearly sunrise. Camera flashes pierced the rain-soaked darkness, while reporters shouted questions from the street below. Did Jonathan Vale pay you? Are you carrying his child? How long has the affair been happening? Curled against her kitchen cabinets, Emily gripped her phone with trembling hands. Anxiety squeezed the air from her lungs. This wasn't curiosity. It was a hunt. And somehow, Jonathan Vale's world had dragged her straight into the center of it. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She answered immediately. "What do you want from me?" Jonathan's calm voice came through the line. "You can't stay there anymore." Of course, he already knew. Men like Jonathan always seem to know everything. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice." The blunt response instantly irritated her. "I always have a choice. Not when reporters are bribing your neighbors and following your mother's nurses." Fear settled heavily in her chest. "My security team is downstairs," Jonathan continued. "Pack a bag." Before she could argue, the line went dead. 2 hours later, Emily stepped out of a black SUV and into another world. Jonathan's penthouse occupied the top floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glowing skyline while rain slid down the glass walls outside. Black marble floors reflected soft golden light, creating an atmosphere that felt luxurious yet strangely cold. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress. Jonathan stood near the kitchen counter removing his watch. "You'll stay here until the media loses interest." "You mean until people stop assuming I'm carrying your secret baby?" His jaw tightened. "They'll move on eventually." "That's easy for you to say." For a moment he looked away. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." The answer caught her off guard. As he headed toward the hallway, he paused. "Your room is upstairs." "And what happens now?" Without turning around, Jonathan replied, "Now we survive the next few weeks without destroying each other." Then he disappeared. The warning lingered long after he was gone. The following days settled into an unexpected routine. Jonathan left before sunrise and rarely returned before midnight. Yet despite seeing little of him, Emily began noticing things. He barely slept. Several nights, she found him standing alone by the windows at 3 in the morning, staring silently across Manhattan. Sometimes he forgot to eat. Other times she heard him pacing outside his office, speaking in low, angry whispers into his phone. And every night, without fail, he visited his sister. One evening, Emily accidentally overheard a conversation with Sophia's doctor. "She's getting weaker." Jonathan gripped the marble countertop until his knuckles turned white. "What aren't you telling me?" The fear in his voice shocked her. Not because it existed, because he worked so hard to hide it. The moment he noticed Emily nearby, the vulnerability vanished. The cold billionaire mask returned instantly. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "You should ask yourself the same question." For the briefest second, Jonathan almost smiled. After that, things changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Midnight conversations over coffee. Sarcastic arguments. Accidental touches that lingered longer than they should. Then came the surprise that confused Emily most. Jonathan began defending her publicly. His media team quietly shut down cruel articles attacking her appearance. Celebrity blogs deleted humiliating stories overnight. One journalist even issued a public apology. Emily couldn't understand it. Why would the man who publicly humiliated her now be protecting her? The question haunted her. One rainy evening, she discovered something else. Passing an open study door, she froze. Jonathan sat alone surrounded by family photographs. A younger version of himself smiled beside Sophia. Their mother stood between them. Their father stared sternly from another frame. Jonathan held one picture in silence. And suddenly, he didn't look powerful. He looked lonely. The sight stayed with her long after she walked away. 2 days later, everything changed. As she approached Jonathan's office, raised voices drifted through the partially closed door. "If the baby exists," one executive snapped, "control of the company changes permanently." Another voice answered sharply, "That child threatens the inheritance structure." Emily stopped cold. The baby. Sophia's baby. Suddenly, this arrangement no longer felt like a medical procedure. It felt dangerous. Before she could hear more, footsteps approached, forcing her to leave. That night, a violent thunderstorm swept across Manhattan. Just after midnight, the penthouse lost power. Darkness swallowed everything. Inside a private elevator, Emily felt panic explode through her chest as the car jolted to a stop between floors. She pressed the emergency button repeatedly. Nothing happened. Then a familiar voice emerged from the darkness. Emily. Relief flooded through her. Emergency lights flickered on moments later. Jonathan stood only inches away. "You're okay," he said softly. "I hate elevators." His expression immediately softened. Very gently, he took her trembling hand. "Look at me."
She did.
"Breathe slowly." Outside, thunder shook the city. Inside the trapped elevator, Jonathan never let go. His thumb brushed lightly against her skin. The air shifted. Warmer. Closer. Dangerously intimate. Their faces were only inches apart. Neither moved away. Jonathan's gaze dropped briefly to her lips. Emily's heart pounded. For one suspended moment, everything felt inevitable. Then his phone buzzed. The spell shattered instantly. Jonathan frowned and checked the message. The color drained from his face. A knot tightened in Emily's stomach. "What is it?" Slowly, he turned the screen toward her. Her blood ran cold. The photo showed her sleeping inside her penthouse bedroom, taken secretly.
From only a few feet away.
Beneath the image was a single message. "I know everything." The storm that had battered Manhattan all night seemed determined to make things worse by morning. Emily woke to the sound of shouting. Not Jonathan's usual cold, controlled voice. This was raw anger, the kind that came from losing control. Heart pounding, she rushed downstairs toward the office, where voices echoed through the penthouse. This never should have leaked. Jonathan's furious voice cut through the room. "We're containing it," someone replied nervously. "Containing it?" Jonathan snapped. "It's already everywhere." Emily stepped into the doorway and froze. Television screens covered the walls. Every single one displayed her face. Her stomach dropped. Headlines flashed across the screens. Mystery woman's medical records leaked. Jonathan Vail's secret baby scandal confirmed. $1 million surrogate contract exposed. The room tilted.
No.
Her hands began trembling. Reporters were discussing private fertility records on live television. Worse still, someone had leaked her medical history, weight reports, hormone levels, psychological evaluations. Everything. Social media was even crueler. She trapped him for money. Of course she did. He paid for her silence. Imagine carrying a billionaire's baby and still looking like that. Every insecurity she had spent years fighting suddenly belonged to the entire world. Jonathan turned and saw her. For a brief second, guilt flashed across his face. That hurt most of all. "How did they get this?" she whispered. Nobody answered. And suddenly Emily knew why. Her eyes slowly found Jonathan. "You knew." The room fell silent. Jonathan dismissed the executives with a glance. Within seconds, they were alone. "You knew someone had access to private information?" His expression darkened. "We detected unusual activity 3 days ago." Emily stared at him. 3 days ago? Before the elevator photo. His silence answered for him. Pain spread through her chest. "You let me stay here knowing someone was watching me?" "I increased security." That's not an answer. For the first time since they met, Jonathan's control slipped. "I was trying to find out who was responsible before causing panic." "Panic," she laughed bitterly. "Jonathan, my body is trending online like entertainment." The billionaire mask cracked. "You promised confidentiality." "I know. You promised protection." "I'm trying." "No," she whispered. "You're trying to protect the baby." The accusation hit its target. Jonathan went completely still. Tears filled Emily's eyes. "That's all I ever was to you." "That's not true." "Then what am I?" she demanded. "A contract? A backup plan? A convenient body?" Suddenly Jonathan slammed his hand against the marble desk. The impact echoed through the room. Emily flinched, but the expression on his face wasn't anger. It was grief. "You think I wanted any of this?" The pain in his voice stunned her into silence. Jonathan turned away, dragging both hands through his hair. When he spoke again, his voice sounded rough. "My mother died because of this family." Emily froze. Jonathan stared out at the storm-dark skyline. "My grandfather built Vail Industries into an empire. My uncle spent years trying to take it." His eyes remained fixed on the city. "When I was 14, My mother discovered evidence of financial crimes tied to him. The room seemed to grow quieter. She planned to expose everything. His jaw tightened. But before she could,
He stopped.
thunder rolled outside. There was a car accident. A chill ran through Emily. Jonathan finally looked at her. She died protecting me from people carrying the Veil name. The vulnerability in his eyes felt painfully real. And now Sophia is dying, he continued. The moment her child exists, control of the inheritance changes permanently. Confusion crossed Emily's face. Jonathan stepped closer. If Sophia's baby survives, my uncle loses access to billions. Suddenly every piece fit together. The surveillance, the leaks, the pressure. This had never been about a baby alone. It was a war. A corporate war hidden beneath luxury, money, and power. And you still brought me into it, Emily said quietly. Guilt darkened his expression. I was trying to save my sister. At my expense. Neither spoke. The silence felt unbearable. Finally, Emily stepped backward. I can't do this anymore. Emily.
No.
Tears slipped down her cheeks. I spent years learning how to survive, people judging me. I'm not surviving your family, too. Before he could stop her, she turned and walked away. Minutes later, she emerged onto the street. The reporters were already waiting. The crowd surged toward her instantly. Camera flashes exploded through the rain. Questions flew from every direction. Did Jonathan Veil hire you? Are the rumors true? Are you carrying his child? Then one voice cut through all the others. Did Jonathan Veil buy her body? The question hit like a knife. The crowd fell silent, watching, waiting, judging. And suddenly Emily broke. Tears streamed down her face as she pushed through the reporters and disappeared into the storm. That same night, Jonathan sat alone beside Sophia's hospital bed. Machines beeped softly around them. His sister slept peacefully, unaware that everything was falling apart. Jonathan rubbed exhausted hands across his face while security alerts flooded his phone. Media disasters. Stock concerns. Internal leaks. Then his phone rang. Hospital security. He answered immediately. What happened? The voice on the other end sounded terrified. Mr. Veil, your sister is gone. Everything inside him went cold.
What?
We found her room empty during shift change. Within minutes, Jonathan stood inside the hospital surveillance center. Security footage played across dozens of monitors. Doctors running. Nurses searching hallways. Panic everywhere. Then one camera finally revealed the truth. Sophia. Unconscious. Being wheeled through a restricted exit. The person pushing her wore a Veil Industries security uniform. Jonathan stared at the screen in horror, because he recognized the badge. And in that moment, he understood exactly what had happened. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was a declaration of war. Someone inside the Veil family had finally made their move. Rain poured relentlessly over Manhattan, turning the city into a blur of lights and shadows. Somewhere beneath that storm, Jonathan Veil was unraveling. For years, the billionaire CEO had seemed untouchable. Nothing rattled him. Nothing broke through his carefully controlled exterior. But now his sister was missing, and fear had finally found him. Jonathan stormed through the underground parking structure beneath Veil Industries, his soaked shirt clinging to his frame as security teams flooded every exit. Check every route out of the city, he barked into his phone. Airports, train stations, traffic cameras. I want everything. Sir, we're trying. Trying isn't enough. His voice echoed through the concrete structure. This wasn't business. This was Sophia, the only family he had left. Jonathan slammed his fist against the hood of a black SUV and closed his eyes briefly. Helplessness was unfamiliar territory.
And it terrified him.
Across the city, Emily sat inside Vanessa's apartment staring at a muted television. News coverage of Sophia's disappearance played nonstop. Reporters speculated about inheritance battles, corporate rivalries, and the missing embryo at the center of it all. Emily switched off the television. Despite everything that had happened between them, she couldn't stop thinking about Jonathan. Not the billionaire. The man she had seen at the hospital.
Broken.
exhausted, terrified. For the first time, she understood something important. Jonathan didn't build walls because he enjoyed hurting people. He built them because losing people hurt too much.
Her phone rang.
Private number. She answered immediately. Jonathan's voice sounded rough. I know you probably hate me. She remained silent. But I need your help. 40 minutes later, Emily arrived at Jonathan's private security office. The moment she stepped inside, she barely recognized him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His white shirt was wrinkled. His hands trembled whenever he stopped moving. He looked like a man falling apart in real time. What can I do? She asked softly. Jonathan stared at the surveillance screens. She trusted you. Emily blinked. Sophia. His voice cracked slightly. She talked about you constantly after meeting you. A painful warmth settled in Emily's chest. She said you made this whole situation feel human again. Before either of them could say more, one of the investigators spoke up. Sir, we found something. The room instantly shifted. Documents filled the main monitor. Financial transfers, offshore accounts, private surveillance payments, media bribery records. Every trail led to one person. Richard Vale, Jonathan's uncle. Another investigator pulled up additional files. He funded the leaks. More documents appeared. The paparazzi tips. Another. The missing surrogate. Then finally, the last piece appeared. A payment connected directly to the hospital security officer working the night Sophia disappeared. The room fell silent. Richard had orchestrated everything. The leaks, the media attacks, the surveillance, even Sophia's kidnapping. All for control of Vale Industries. Jonathan stared at the evidence without speaking. The anger in his eyes was unmistakable, but beneath it was something worse. Heartbreak. Because this wasn't betrayal by a rival.
It was betrayal by family.
Again. Without a word, Jonathan walked out. Emily followed him through the hallway until they reached the penthouse windows overlooking the rain-covered skyline. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Jonathan finally broke the silence. The night they laughed at you. His voice sounded hollow. I hated myself for joining them. Emily froze. Jonathan kept staring out at the city. I saw your face afterward, and I realized I'd become exactly the kind of man my mother warned me about. The confession hit harder than she expected, because it was honest. Painfully honest. Jonathan laughed quietly, though there was no humor in it. Do you know the worst part? He turned toward her. His eyes were red from exhaustion. I spent my entire life becoming powerful enough to protect the people I love. His voice lowered. And somehow everyone around me still gets hurt. Emily's chest tightened. Jonathan stepped closer. I don't care about the contracts anymore. She stared at him. I don't care about the inheritance. Another step. I don't care what happens to the company.
His voice softened.
I just want you safe. The words settled between them. No masks. No business deals. Just truth. Emily looked away briefly before whispering, I tried not to fall in love with you. Jonathan inhaled sharply. She laughed weakly through tears. I really tried. Emotion flashed across his face. But men with power don't usually protect women like me, she continued. They destroy them. Something inside Jonathan seemed to break. Slowly, he reached up and brushed a hand against her cheek. Like he was afraid she might disappear. I would burn this entire city down before I let anyone hurt you again. The promise wasn't dramatic. It was sincere. And somehow that made it devastating. Tears filled Emily's eyes. The distance between them vanished. Jonathan pulled her gently into his arms. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply held each other while grief, loneliness, fear, and hope collided between them. Then Jonathan tilted her chin upward. Their foreheads touched. Breaths mingled. And finally, he kissed her. Softly.
Carefully.
Like she mattered. Like she always had. Every wall he had spent years building collapsed in that single moment. And Emily kissed him back. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan. Inside, for the first time, everything felt still. Then Jonathan's phone rang. The sound shattered the moment. He frowned and answered. Within seconds, all color drained from his face. Emily's stomach tightened. What happened? Jonathan lowered the phone slowly. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then his voice broke. The embryo. Fear gripped her chest. The doctors think the stress from Sophia's condition may have damaged its viability. The room went silent. Jonathan stared at the floor. The transfer might fail. The words hung heavily between them, because after the kidnappings, betrayals, media attacks, and sacrifices, there was suddenly a terrifying possibility that none of it had been enough, and that everything they had fought for might already be slipping away. Morning arrived beneath a storm of cameras. News vans lined the streets outside Vale Industries before sunrise. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, waiting for the next scandal to break. But inside the executive boardroom, Jonathan Vale stood completely still. Gone was the man hiding behind emotional walls. Gone was the man reacting to crises. Today, he looked like someone finally prepared to end a war. Around him, executives whispered nervously while shareholders joined through giant digital screens mounted across the room. At the far end of the table sat Richard Vale.
Calm. Confident.
For years, he had hidden behind power, money, and influence. Today, that protection was about to disappear. Jonathan glanced around the room before speaking. Before we begin today's shareholder vote, there's something everyone deserves to see. The room fell silent. With a simple nod, he signaled the technology team. The screens came alive. Documents appeared one after another. Offshore bank accounts, bribery payments, media contracts, private surveillance records. The silence quickly turned into shock. Whispers spread around the room. Then came the hospital records, the surveillance photographs, the evidence linking every attack directly to Richard Vale. Faces around the boardroom turned pale. Several shareholders stood abruptly. Others stared at the screens in disbelief. For the first time all morning, Richard stopped smiling. Jonathan's voice remained calm. You orchestrated surveillance against my sister. Another document appeared. You leaked confidential medical records. Another. You paid media outlets to publicly destroy an innocent woman. At the back of the room, Emily watched silently as cameras broadcast everything live across the country. Then Jonathan looked directly at his uncle. And when that wasn't enough, his voice hardened. You kidnapped Sophia. The room exploded into chaos. Executives shouted. Shareholders demanded answers. Security agents entered through side doors. Richard slowly rose from his chair. You have no idea what leadership requires, he said coldly. Jonathan laughed once. A short, bitter sound. No, he replied. I know exactly what monsters call leadership. Federal agents stepped forward. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the stunned boardroom. Just like that, Richard Vale's empire collapsed. The man who had spent years manipulating lives was finally exposed. And for the first time, Jonathan felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. Within hours, the story dominated every headline. But this time, the spotlight had shifted. The same internet that once mocked Emily now praised her. Articles called her resilient. Commentators described her strength. Millions of strangers suddenly admired the woman they had once ridiculed. Yet strangely, none of it mattered anymore. Because somewhere between humiliation, heartbreak, fear, and survival, Emily had learned something important. Her worth had never belonged to strangers. And once she understood that, their opinions lost all power over her. 3 days later, the hospital felt unusually quiet. Jonathan sat beside Sophia's recovery room staring at the floor while doctors reviewed the final embryo viability results. Weeks of stress had stripped away every trace of billionaire perfection. He looked exhausted, human. Beside him, Emily sat quietly, her hand intertwined with his. Jonathan hadn't let go once all morning. Not once. Finally, the fertility specialist stepped into the hallway. Everyone stood. Sophia gripped her wheelchair nervously. Jonathan barely remembered how to breathe. The doctor smiled. The procedure was successful. For a moment, nobody moved. Then came the words they had been praying to hear. The embryo survived. Sophia burst into tears immediately. Jonathan simply stood there, frozen, like his mind couldn't process what he had heard. Then emotion finally broke through. A trembling breath escaped him before he covered his face with both hands. Years of pressure, grief, fear, and guilt crashed into him all at once. Emily wrapped her arms around him, not because he was weak, because he had carried too much for too long. Nearby, Sophia laughed through her tears. "We did it." Jonathan lifted his head and looked at Emily. The love in his eyes stole her breath away. For the first time since they met, there were no walls left between them. Only trust, only love, only hope. Months later, spring had returned to Manhattan. The city glowed beneath a golden evening sky while warm winds drifted through the streets below. High above it all, Emily stood barefoot on the penthouse balcony. One hand rested gently against the curve of her stomach.
Peace.
Real peace. Something she had once believed she would never find. The balcony door slid open behind her. Jonathan stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of tea. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her from behind. Not possessively,
Protectively.
lovingly. The sharp edges that once defined him had softened. He smiled more, slept better, laughed during late-night conversations. And whenever anxiety threatened to return, he reached for her hand instinctively, as though she reminded him life could still be beautiful after surviving disaster. "No meetings today?" Emily teased. Jonathan kissed her temple. "I canceled half my schedule." She laughed. "That sounds irresponsible. You're my most important investment." She rolled her eyes. "That's the least romantic thing you've ever said." He smiled and rested his hand over hers. "Then let me try again." The city lights sparkled beneath them. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment before speaking softly. "They mocked the woman who became the reason I survived." Tears filled Emily's eyes. Not from sadness. From healing. From finally understanding that her value had never depended on headlines, strangers, or public approval. Jonathan rested his hand against her stomach and closed his eyes briefly. Beneath his palm was a future neither of them had expected to find. A future built from survival, forgiveness, and love. And as Manhattan glowed beneath the night sky, they stood together knowing something neither had believed possible months earlier. After all the destruction, they had finally found their way home. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts below. Do you think Jonathan and Emily would have fallen in love if that disastrous gala night had never happened? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next emotional journey, because sometimes the people the world underestimates become the ones who change everything.